All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live, wherever you are joining us on the website, on Twitch, on Twitter. Thanks so much for making us a part of your Monday. Josh Doring, Chris Brown are here with me in the correct boxes on the screen, I might add. Gentlemen, how you doing? How's your weekend? How are you doing on this fine Monday morning?
Pretty good. Can't complain. We had a pretty exciting weekend of football. A couple upsets thrown in there. Like we knew there had to be something, right? It wasn't going to go completely according to schedule. We had a couple upsets. We've got 2 of 3 days in a row of good football in the books. Hopefully another good game, another good day of football tonight. So feeling pretty good.
Yeah, that was as much football as I've consumed in a long, long time.
I saw somebody say, I can't remember where it was. It was either on a radio show or a podcast, or they used the phrase, "This is the best three straight days of football of the entire year." And
yeah,
at first I was like, no way, right? But probably, if for no other reason than there just aren't typically 3 straight days with really awesome football, right? Instead of there not being. Right, we've had really awesome weekends worth of football on a Saturday and a Sunday, but having a national championship game on a Monday is better than pretty much any Monday night football game there could possibly be, at least in theory, until college football takes over and, we have a non-competitive game, because that's just how the college football playoff works. But it's a big time weekend for football. I have a question for you all. So first of all, welcome to 110 Daily. We're talking wildcard weekend here at the start of the show. We'll get into winners and losers in the middle of the hour, and then in the hour in the show today with a preview of the college football playoff, national championship, Alabama, Ohio State. I was about to say Clemson, Alabama. I've just gotten to that point where it's just second nature. It's not. It's Ohio State and Alabama, and after this crazy season, we have the perennial Big Ten superpower versus the perennial SEC superpower, and it just sort of feels normal in an otherwise unnormal time. But we'll start with wildcard weekend, and I have a question that I would like to pose to you all.
Yeah, what do you got?
What is the wildest thing that happened on wildcard weekend? And it's a multiple choice question.
Okay.
1, that somehow John Wolford looked like the better quarterback than Russell Wilson in a playoff game in which he played like 45 seconds. The Titans only scored 13 points and managed to only lose by 7, which I would never thought would be the case if they only scored 13 points. The Browns putting up 28 first quarter points, or maybe that's all I got. That might be all I have for you, but or option D or E or however many I just gave you, or other one of those. What was the wildest thing that happened on wildcard weekend, or in other words, the thing that happened that you were least expecting?
I would have to go with the Browns, because the Browns did something that nobody since the 1970 merger had done, which is exactly like you said, scored 28 first quarter points.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the most bizarre start to a game from the very beginning, when you snap the ball essentially out the back of the end zone.
Right.
But unlike in the Super Bowl, the other team recovered it and didn't actually go out the back of the end zone, so it was 7 points instead of 2.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the other 2 interceptions, the 3 interceptions in the first half, the 4 turnovers. The most interesting part of this to me is that, yeah, the Browns scored a bunch of points, but it's not like they looked all that impressive. They were just gifted 35 points almost. And then they made some plays late to make sure that game didn't get super close.
Mm-hmm.
Give credit to them. They stepped it up when they needed to, because that would put there was a point at the end of the third quarter there where that was in danger of becoming a 1-score game and getting really interesting with plenty of time left.
Right.
And then the Browns sort of reassumed control. But my answer, the thing I did not see coming was that much of an implosion from the Steelers, where they just handed the game to the Browns.
They couldn't have lost in a more Pittsburgh Steelers in the last 7 weeks way.
Yeah.
They turned the ball over 4 times. All 4 came from the arm of Ben Roethlisberger, but that same arm supplied you with 501 yards. So there were more, right? You had the snap out of the back, but 4 interceptions from the arm of Ben Roethlisberger. That arm threw 68 times and for 501 yards and 4 touchdowns, and you only ran for 52 yards. You did get a touchdown from James Conner, but we've been talking about this, even after the Steelers looked a little better in the last 2 weeks of the season, and specifically against the Colts, they hadn't actually fixed anything. We just saw what we already knew, that on any given day, you can win a football game against a good team when Ben Roethlisberger is your quarterback, but other things have to go well, and one of those things is him not throwing 4 interceptions. That was almost that was more surprising than this, but I was really impressed by the lack of mistakes that the Cleveland offense made without Stefanski being there to call the plays. If you told me Baker Mayfield was going to throw for 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions in his first playoff game, I would have called you crazy. And I mean, they had 1 fumble that was not lost, that was recovered, but that was right. I would agree with you, Josh, that I don't feel like the Browns are going to. The Browns didn't on their own score these 48 points. They got a lot of help from Pittsburgh, but I was pleasantly surprised by the lack of at least overwhelming mistakes, and mistakes that made me go, oh, that happened because they don't have the guy who's usually calling their plays, or there was no super clear, at least that I can remember off the top of my head, super clear, oh man, that would have been different if Stefanski was there sort of moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, it was definitely, in some sense, I'm completely in agreement in that this was sort of the way the Steelers lost this was sort of what we've seen from them the past several weeks. In some ways, though, I thought it was interesting, and just that, there was always a chance that this kind of thing could happen, that the Browns could pull off this upset. I never could have envisioned really it being 48-37, the final score. I kind of thought, I thought that there could be the kind of mistakes, the number of turnovers, the interceptions that Roethlisberger threw, but then at the same time, I wouldn't have expected the Steelers' defense to fall apart to the level that it did as well, and make this a scenario where, I thought that, maybe he could make those kind of mistakes, but the defense then wouldn't make that kind of mistakes, and this game might end, let's say 35-28 or something, and that's how the Browns would pull off an upset. The Steelers have this, identity of their defense as well, and they allowed 5 offensive touchdowns. They forced exactly 0 turnover takeaways defensively. They had absolutely 0 sacks, not a single sack, and every time that Mayfield and the Browns needed a big play, they got it. Every single time, for the most part. I mean, there were, a few exceptions, but it was just sort of when your defense is bad, you're never going to overcome that when you have that many turnovers offensively if you're the Steelers. But they weren't helping themselves defensively at all, of course, allowing the Browns to jump out to the start that they did. I thought that was wild.
And Chris Collinsworth made that point during the broadcast. If you give the Steelers 37 points and you ask them, how do you feel about this game?
Yeah.
You feel very good.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They gave the Browns so many opportunities, and the Browns, to their credit, took advantage. Right. It was just all you had to do was not mess it up. And that's, to a certain extent, easier said than done when you don't have your head coach and so many other key players. But that's exactly what they did. Credit to Baker Mayfield, credit to that offense. The other thing that I thought was really interesting just about the weekend overall was the amount of sort of historical markers we had. You have the Browns. You have the Buccaneers, who hadn't won a playoff game since they won the Super Bowl in 2002.
Right.
Lamar Jackson gets his first win, and the Ravens become the last team in the NFL to make a comeback of 10 points in the last 4 seasons. Ben Roethlisberger sets a NFL record for the amount of completions because he throws the ball 500,000 times in that game.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a lot going on. And then the other thing I found interesting was that some of the defenses that we expected to show up really didn't. You talked about Pittsburgh. I was disappointed in Washington's defense, specifically that defensive line. To me, the unsung heroes of that game were Tampa Bay's offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
You're not beating Tom Brady when Tom Brady gets to sit there and pick you apart. And for 75% of the game, that's exactly what happened, no matter what Taylor Heineke did.
Right.
The one defense that showed up that was expected to, and the Colts defense was pretty good. The Rams did exactly what we knew that they were capable of, and what we talked about on Friday with the Jalen Ramsey can shut DK Metcalf down. They're the best passing defense in the NFL. They did exactly what they were capable of. I just had more faith in Russell Wilson than that, but that Seahawks offense just looked lost. And again, that's not a good matchup. That one played out. The Washington one did not play out exactly how I thought it would. That was my fear for the Seahawks, and it came to fruition. But you sort of looked at some of these defenses and thinking they can keep their teams in games. And what we saw was an average of 29.5 points by winning teams. In the last 2 seasons, that average was 21.
And the team that you saw, the team that their defense kept them in the game was the team that I never thought would have their defense keep them in the game, and that was the Tennessee Titans. If you
the best defensive performances arguably came from the teams you didn't expect it in that Tennessee-Baltimore game. Yeah.
If you told me that Tennessee was going to score 13 points in this game, I would have bet the over 20 and a half differential between points at the end of the game. And we're really talking about one real mistake that they made with Lamar Jackson and letting him, run half the field and score a touchdown, which was a mistake, but also that I don't think there's maybe a play in Lamar Jackson's career that shows why he's just so terrifying, because he just makes cuts and moves at full speed, and it just is so unfair for a quarterback to be able to do that. But if you told me that, first of all, that Derrick Henry was going to average 2.2 yards per carry and only rush for 40, and that the Ravens were going to rush for 236 yards, and that Tannehill was only going to complete 18 passes the entire game, if you told me all of those things were going to happen, I would have bet on a blowout. I would have been convinced that Baltimore was going to win this game by at least 17, and it wasn't going to be particularly close. And we still had a game in which Tennessee had a chance to tie it at the end, relatively close to the end of regulation. Of course, you throw an interception, and that's the end of it. But that was the thing that surprised me the most was not that Baltimore won. I thought Tennessee was going to win this game, and I was obviously wrong. But I thought they would win this game they were the last team to get the ball 35-28, 35-31 type of affair. I didn't think that they would make this very close and only score 13 points. That was pretty shocking to me, and I just sort of kept waiting for these offenses to explode and for us to get 50 points of total offense in the second half or something, and the final score end up being somewhere like 35-28 or 35-31, and it just never happened. But Tennessee remained close, so that might be the wildest part of the weekend for me, was that Tennessee's defense was good, and that was the reason that they were able to at least hang around in this game. And specifically, Derrick Henry just never was able to get anything rolling. I mean, he had 8 yards. His long carry was 8 yards, and we're talking about that's 20% of all of his yards he had in this game. That's also something I didn't think was going to happen.
Yeah, that game, the Ravens-Titans game was for me as well. I think the game that most differed from a path that I thought that any of these games would take, just in terms of all the way around. You have the Titans, you have the Ravens, able to win this game despite only scoring 20 points. And you have, they just a lot of credit to their defense in that, right? You could just tell from the jump they were just not going to be beat by Derrick Henry. They were going to make the Titans beat them a different way, and they went really extreme in that approach. They loaded the box defensively with 8 or more defenders in the box on a 72% of Derrick Henry's runs, and so that forced them to forced the Titans to turn to Ryan Tannehill to make them hurt you in the air, and it worked early for the Titans in this game, but it just wasn't sustainable. And so, yeah, that was definitely the game that surprised me in the overall Obviously, it was different. It was the outcome that I had projected, but I never would have expected it to come in that way. And then, the other one that I come back to, which we've talked about already, is that Rams Seahawks game. And in some ways, I feel like we should have seen it more coming. I should, seen it coming more. Now, this was always something that we knew could happen. It wasn't like all of us were extremely confident that the Seahawks were going to come out with the win here. But the way in which it happened, the way in which they just completely fell flat on their face at home against a team whose backup quarterback was starting and then was sent to the hospital, whose starting quarterback was the backup and then put into the game with a partially functioning throwing thumb, and whose top defender missed most of the second half with a rib injury, and they still just fell flat on their face.
Yeah.
I mean, Russell Wilson was just missing passes left and right. He was under constant pressure, and he was just not handling it well, and he was not put in good situations either. There was just no cohesiveness to that Seattle offense. They struggled to move, and in some sense we should have seen it, because they struggled to move the ball consistently for weeks, and they were facing a great defense in the postseason. We all know what Russell Wilson is capable of doing and stepping up and doing in any given game, which is why I think, especially looking at the Rams quarterback situation, why we kind of, I think all three of us went with the Seahawks to win this game at least. But in some sense, we kind of should have seen this coming, and there are a lot of questions for the Seahawks now. That's one team I'm really going to be watching this offseason, because they're in a weird spot. They don't have a lot of cap space. They don't have a lot of draft picks. They're not going to make any big coaching changes. So that's a situation where I don't know how that program gets fixed. That was an interesting outcome. Not a shocker, but an interesting one.
And even more so, I mean, this is a team that has a quarterback that was the front runner for MVP through the first 5 weeks, and it's not like they just went 12-4, right? This is clearly a football team that is in its current state not going to get anywhere close to a Super Bowl, but this is also a team that just went 12-4 and has one of the most exciting young wide receivers, and has Russell Wilson, who's a Super Bowl champion, and right, so it is a really weird situation there, because clearly something's got to give. And I also didn't think that they were going to let the Rams score 30 points in this game. I really didn't see that one coming. If you told me Seattle scored 20 points, I would have given them a pretty good shot to win this game with a banged-up Jared Goff or John Wolford. Because it's not like Jared Goff was good. He was missing – there were some really bad passes he made. Now, bad passes that just fell to the ground innocently, right? So it's not like he made any real mistakes. He didn't throw any interceptions. But, that one was... And I'm a little shook, because typically in the NFL playoffs, I go with the team that has the best quarterback. And that just... Either the team that has the best quarterback, or the team that has the quarterback that has proven something to me in the playoffs. That's essentially where I went with all of these games. I mean, Buffalo's just better than Indy, so even if Rivers has the more playoff experience than Josh Allen, everybody and their mother would take Josh Allen over Phillip Rivers right now. It's Russell Wilson versus either a banged up Jared Goff or John Wolford. Right, I took Tom Brady, I took a Ryan Tannehill who did it last year versus a Lamar Jackson that I hadn't seen do it yet. You take Drew Brees, and then I took Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger, and it just wasn't as foolproof as I sometimes think it is, and maybe that's just naive of me, but there were some quarterbacks that I had faith in that just didn't, and not that they all had horrible games, that they just didn't step up in ways that I thought they would.
Yeah, I think the Steelers and Seahawks, to sort of go back to Chris's point, are in a similar spot where there's not all that much you can do. But the Steelers in particular have a bunch of free agents they need to make decisions on, and not a lot of money to bring them back. Mm-hmm. That you're kind of, depending on what Ben Roethlisberger does, you're just kind of stuck. And obviously you're keeping Russell Wilson.
Right.
This is your team, so you got to get better schematically. You got to figure out how to not be so one-dimensional. Tyler Lockett was talking about how much more difficult it got when they became a passing offense.
Right.
And obviously we've been banging on that about the Steelers all season long, pretty much, at least just after they went 11-0.
Right.
The other two things I want to get to quick. Somebody at least needs to give Taylor Heineke a backup job. At the very least, that man is a high-level backup.
There's no way there are no way there are 30 backups in the NFL that are better than he is.
Right. It wasn't about, and that's the other thing. It wasn't about the numbers. He was just so comfortable. He made good decision after good decision. That interception was just unlucky. That was not a bad read. He's athletic. He was making plays. I was blown away. Big fan. And if you're the 49ers, the Bears, the Giants, any of these teams, the Eagles, if you trade one of your quarterbacks who think you have your guy but don't feel great about him, why not bring him in?
Friendly competition.
Right.
Yeah.
If nothing, and you don't have to go give him the job. If you want to stick with Garoppolo or Denver, that's the other team too. If you want to stick with Drew Lock, that's fine. But that man can win you games. That I was just very impressed with him. And then also, I feel like we should talk about the Colts-Bills ending real quick before we get out of here.
Sure.
And this is all I really have to say on this game. The way it all played out was exactly why I picked the Bills. It's not that I thought the Bills were that much better and that this wasn't going to be a close game. It's just I had that much faith in the Bills to deliver in the key moments and to just make the decisions that you have to win this game. Frank Reich was coaching like a guy who had an incredible amount of confidence in himself and his team, and then neither of them delivered. He didn't call the best game. You got the missed field goal, the going off sides on that key play. You'd go down the list.
When everybody on the planet knew that it was a hard count. Everybody on the planet.
Right. The drops. This was self-inflicted by the Colts.
Sure.
But, and you and I were going a little bit back and forth about this via text during the game, Josh. But this is the other point I want to get to. I don't want to hear about you being upset about Frank Reich's decision to kick a field goal here or go for two here, whatever it might be. That is not why they lost this game. They lost this game because they couldn't execute, and because he didn't execute in those situations, and because Blankenship missed the field goal. I was incredibly frustrated that we ended up talking about that as opposed to just their lack of execution. The Bills executed. The Colts should have won this game, but the Bills executed better, and so that's why they're moving on.
Right.
This is not about – they didn't lose because he decided to not be aggressive earlier, because he decided to be uber aggressive on that fourth and 4 or 6 or whatever it was, the 4th and goal. If Philip Rivers makes that pass, they win. It's not about the decisions, it's about the execution.
And specifically that 4th down right at the end, you're talking about the 4th and goal right before halftime, right?
Yeah.
Before the Bills went down and managed to score. The reason that 4th down was such a weird spot then is because they ran a toss play after the 2-minute warning. They ran the only play that they could run one of the possible outcomes is that you lose 5 yards. That's what if you run an ISO right up the gut with Jonathan Taylor twice, you're probably going to get in from the half-yard line or the 1 or wherever they were. I was listening to it on the radio while I was driving, so I wasn't, I didn't actually see the play. But even if you get stuffed, it's 0 yards, right? And you get to either try it again or you get to run a play-action flat route. Like the play-action flat route, doesn't work from the 6-yard line if the defense has any sort of scheme to stop it, right? It can still work from the 1-yard line as long as you make a good pass, right? It's just hard to keep a 250-pound man from continuing his momentum into the end zone. But if you have 6 yards to try and stop him from doing that, then it's much easier. You're right. The thing with Buffalo that scares me a little bit is like Travis Kelce might have 500 yards receiving against the Bills. I mean, Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, and Mo Alley Cox looked like superstars, unguardable. I mean, Trey Burton has been very okay this year, not great at all, and they just couldn't guard anybody with these short little passes. And Philip Rivers just didn't get a whole lot of chances to throw the ball downfield. That was probably by design, but if you can't guard Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, and Mo Alley Cox even a little bit, I mean, the three of them combined for 14 receptions and upwards of 150, 160 yards of total receiving. If you can't like really guard that at all, well, how are you going to guard Travis Kelce? I mean, whatever the receptions over under is, the yards over under is for Travis Kelce, if the Bills actually end up playing the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, I'm hammering those overs because the Bills can't guard tight ends apparently. And that was, on some of those, especially late in the game when Indy was just running through the Bills defense all of a sudden and just getting down the field at will, those tight ends were a huge part of that. And if Patrick Mahomes can go to his favorite target, or, arguably his most dangerous, most consistent, whatever you want to throw on there, they have a lot of those dangerous weapons, so we can have an argument about who that person actually is. But Travis Kelce right now is the best tight end in football, and if you can't guard Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, or Mo Alley Cox, then Patrick Mahomes is always going to have somewhere to go with the football, and that makes your job a whole lot tougher.
Yeah, and you said, Josh, you felt sort of validated in sort of picking the Bills as the team that you were the most confident in. And I kind of felt the opposite in some sense, that I was glad I didn't have more confidence in them because of exactly what you said, that the Colts did this to themselves by not executing. One or two plays different. It wasn't as if the Colts were stopped and by the Bills. The Colts beat themselves. The Colts should have won this game if they executed properly, which is why I'm not down on the Bills because the Colts showed that they're a good team. It wasn't that the Colts beat themselves, but what they actually, but then it was clear they were also just not a very great team. They were a good team that had an opportunity to win this game had they executed, and they didn't, which is why, like you just mentioned, Josh, there's some not concerns with the Bills. I'm not down on the Bills, but I am sort of not. I'm not, I haven't changed my tune completely about them, but there are things that I'm watching that makes me cautious about the Bills moving forward.
Especially when you've got a matchup against the Ravens and then theoretically Kansas City.
Right.
I do not feel as good about the Bills' chances of making the Super Bowl, I think is the easiest way to put it. The other thing that irked me above all else in that game, that is not getting enough attention, Frank Reich challenged a call
in the middle.
Was a clear. Right.
Yeah.
He was never going to win, and he did it without waiting for his upstairs video person to give him feedback.
And lost a timeout.
That timeout may have at least cost them a chance to make that game more interesting at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fumble. I don't understand what happened, but that's neither here nor there at this point.
And also at the same time, there was on that last drive, I also didn't see this play, but the radio guys were making it seem like the fumble call that wasn't called a fumble was clearly and obviously a fumble.
It was a fumble. I don't understand. Yeah.
But the point is there, and maybe so you get lucky there, and then you get lucky, and you still have a couple timeouts left, and then you turn that into a touchdown. And because the radio guys were the only thing I'll say, and then we'll go to break real quick, is that the fact that the Bills got their first game under their belt with fans actually in those seats, and Josh Allen got his first playoff victory and looked pretty comfortable and looked like the moment wasn't too big for him. Those are two things that I will point to in defending the Bills when it comes to how I feel about them next week. Having screaming fans, even if it's only 7,000 of them, when you haven't had them all year, changes things, whether it's communication or just feeling the intensity a little bit more. And when you have a guy who hasn't won a playoff game yet, that just means a lot. And to have that first one under Josh Allen's belt is something that I will hang my hat on, even if they didn't do it as convincingly, or if there's a very real argument that the Colts should have won this game. Even if those arguments are very much true, I will find some comfort in those two things. Coming up next, we'll do winners, losers before we move on to the College Football Playoff National Championship. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.